So one of the questions I get asked all the time is, how do I make my scales? So I figured today I would just do a live stream and show you everything I can in this short amount of time. This has been kind of a trial and error process for about 2.5 years for me, and I am by no means perfect at it, and I actually continue to change my method all the time because I find something that works better or makes it easier or whatever. But I've gotten to a point that I'm pretty happy with them for the most part. So I figured I'd start cranking some out. So I'm not sure how to see comments. Oh, perfect. Peter B, thank you. That was what I was just gonna find out, was if comments popped up, so at least I can kind of see here. So I'm doing good. Thank you. I appreciate you hopping on. I I just realized that Neves Knives is doing a live stream at the same time, so that's perfect. I won't have a whole bunch of people watching me while I'm working here. This has always been something that I wanted to show people, but always got nervous about filming it and making a video. You see so many videos of people doing their thing with the time lapse and the montage and all that stuff, and I just don't like video editing, so I figured I'd do one live, and if it sucks, I just won't upload it, so maybe only a few people will ever know. But so what I got going on here, basically I'm trying to get one to a certain stage, but I tried to have some of them in all stages of progress here, so I can kind of show you along the way without having to sit here and work on one from start to finish, because honestly, even a small classic size Victorinox, they can take a couple hours a piece. I haven't figured out a way to mass produce them aside from cutting my blanks, sanding them all, and kind of taking them through the process. But I did recently set up kind of a collaboration with Joe over at Lancelot Leather, so I'm trying to make a batch to go over to him. I've got a few that are almost done. The rest of them will be ready here in a couple of days, and then they're going to go up on his website and be able to get a nice leather slip with it. So that's kind of exciting. And yeah, so I guess I will just take you guys through from the beginning how I do this. Pretty much need to start with a flat piece of koa and cut them out on the bandsaw. Basically, I take a Swiss Army knife, one that's taken apart, and if you guys aren't familiar with that process, this is one. I'm trying to do all this in frame here, but this is a standard classic, missing one scale because I already popped it off. I will get to that in a second, but pretty easy. Take a nice thin sharp edge, remove the toothpick, get something slid in under there like that, and then gently pop it off. This one's probably filthy underneath because this is an old used one, but basically pop off pretty easily. You can see on the back are the holes, and those match up to the rivets on the body, and they just snap in place. John, thanks for hopping on. Good look a flagpole. Yeah, if you need new scales, my friend, that's something I'm getting to. I have bags of scales. So if anybody ever just needs plain red scales, hit me up. Cover shipping, I'll send them to you, no problem. I've got tons and tons of scale takeoffs that I'll show you what I do with them in a second. But first, once I've got the scale off, I actually had a couple of these that were junk. They had a broken spring or something inside, so I drilled out the rivets, popped off the liners, and this is my template. So I You know, get a flat piece of koa. This one actually was running this way, so I get both halves. I don't usually book match my pieces, but I do like them to come from the same flowing piece and go in the right direction, whatever. So there is some thought into how I lay them out and whatnot, but basically, take this guy. Yeah, so the TS49, totally different story, and I will get to inlays in a minute. I don't know who's going to stay on. I could probably talk for 6 hours about this whole process, but yeah, basically the inlays on that one were actually tougher because I can't sand the wood to the knife because it's titanium, and I wasn't modifying the titanium, so that one has to actually fit perfect and down to the 1,000th of an inch by hand, and yes, I did in fact see the email about this match. I apologize, I've been like neck deep in stuff, but yeah, I would be happy to do a set of Smatch It for you. I've got kind of a few in line right now, so I'm trying to get ahead of these and still be able to, you know, keep some money coming in on them and get caught up on the ones that I need to do previous. I've got a ton of projects right now. Probably a good timing. I actually am going through a period with my job. I'm laid off right now, so this is kind of a good time to be cranking out some knives. Gives me a little bit of extra time here, so I'm trying to get caught up with everybody. But I will follow up on the Smatch It with you. So anyway, back to this. Once I get them kind of basically traced out on here, you can see I get my outline. I just take the bandsaw, kind of cut the corners, follow this, and then get it down to basic rough out shape. After I get them to the basic shape, I go to the 1x30 belt sander and go all the way to my line and make them general shape. Now they are usually still just slightly larger than my liners. It's all good, man. It was I knew it was coming, and I was kind of excited for it, to be honest with you. It's not a bad thing. It's kind of an exciting thing. So all good. I was hoping for some extra time to be working on what I want to work on and still be getting some income while I'm doing it, which is kind of cool. So it's a good day. But yeah, so once I get them kind of to this stage, I'll take this liner, and something that changed my life was this double-sided tape. Before I started using this, life was shit and everything was hard. This stuff changed my life. So I take some of that, stick it on here, stick my piece on, take another piece of that, stick my piece on, and then I'm left with a sandwich with my liner in the middle, which makes for a great pattern to sand right to it. Take my favorite little rotary tool, which is a Ryobi, has a battery on the back, so this pen is not too bad to work with. I have a bunch of different Dremel tools. This is the one I use for the most part. I like it. It's comfy, it's small, it's pretty quiet. I work at night, so I like this one a lot. But then I will just take this and kind of start sanding all around. You can see, maybe see, try and catch this on camera, but you can see where the liner is and how much wood I have sticking up. So I'll just keep going over this until I get it, you know, pretty close to what I want. I don't actually go all the way to the liner because I like my scales to stick out beyond the liner just slightly. I just like the look of it. I like the way it feels better. So I'll get to that in a minute, but once I kind of get it to shape all the way around, then I will take this guy and start beveling the edges and kind of do that by hand until I get down to this part, which was what I was kind of working on when the video started. So when I get to this stage here where I've got it, you know, as good as I can get it with the Dremel, I'll go to a piece of hand sandpaper and, get it all dialed in, make sure everything is nice and even, hold it up, make sure the radius is good, everything's kind of even, corners all match up, and make sure everything's looking good. So all the way up until now, we're still in, no big deal territory. I had my 16-year-old kid sanding them for me at one point. He's not as interested in it as I am, but he was bad at it, and I was able to hand him, a set of these, kind of rounded, and some sandpaper, and he could sit here and, for the most part, get it to this stage for me, which is helpful. But that's only part of the battle. I mean, it doesn't take a super long time to get him to this. But from here on it's been a journey into insanity trying to get these things right. And I have been through so many different methods and processes trying to make them as nice as I can, and have the coating stick, have it be bubble free, have it come out smooth, all these different things. I mean, like I said, 2.5, almost 3 years of just trial and error. And on that note, if anybody's watching, if anybody is watching this after the fact and you have gotten something from me in the past, let me know if there's ever any issues with it, if something ever happened. I have had one that the edge started to delaminate a little bit. The super glue, basically what I think was going on, if you look, there are some different streaks in the koa. This black streak that runs through it is a lot harder than the other stuff, and you get that on the edges. This stuff is so dense, it's hard to sand it and get some bite. So I think there was a spot that may not have bonded. And also, after I get them kind of sanded to this point, the other thing I do is, when I start to coat the back, I will take it on a flat piece of sanding paper like this and kind of flatten the back before I stick it onto the knife. So I think I may have exposed a little edge through my coating, and it got a little bit of moisture under there and the edge popped. But basically, I'm not perfect. I've been trying to figure out the best methods, and I really couldn't find a whole lot of information on using super glue as a coating on flat work. There was a ton of stuff about, people who turn pens and use it on the lathe, but not a whole lot about flat work. And I'm going to try and show you a bit of the coating process here. I've got some that are at that stage. But when it works right, it's awesome. When it doesn't work right, it's box of shame. So I have had plenty of them that didn't come out right, but man, the ones that do, it's like chasing that high. It's so good when they come out really, really perfect. And I've tried different epoxy and whatnot and can't find anything else that I like as much as CA glue. Koa endangered? No, koa is actually the most abundant tree here in Hawaii. It's friggin' everywhere. You cannot cut it down, but if it falls naturally, you can use it. So I have not ever cut down a piece of koa. As a matter of fact, I've never even bought a piece of koa. Everything I have has been gifted to me or traded. But no, it is absolutely not endangered. It is a very abundant tree here in Hawaii. So good to see you again, Carly. It's been a while since I made a video here, but moving on. So once I get them to this stage, then what? Once they're sanded, again, this is something that I had to learn the hard way a few times. This is a piece of 220. So if I sand it with 220, it doesn't have that nice shiny koa look to it, but it still has some bite to the wood, which, come to find out, I need to leave. There were some that I would take all the way up over 1,000 grit, and then my coating can't penetrate because it's so smooth. But what's going on here, unfortunately, with koa it's a challenge because you can see all the little pock marks. That's all it's got a very open grain. So all those little spaces of open grain, it might seem like it's flat, but as soon as you try and put coating on there, there's a little air bubble in each of those, and it'll rise up and get stuck in your coating, and it's very frustrating. So I needed to find a way to seal the air bubbles, and I found one video on a guy who would take a real thin grade super glue and flood the wood and then sand it basically all back off, but just fill in the pores with it. The problem is when you sand super glue, it turns white. The dust turns white, and then that white dust, you coat over it, you're stuck with a white spot in your coating. And I tell you, as much as I try and avoid it, there occasionally are little dots and spots that I cannot get out. They are in between the coating. I would have to go all the way back down, and there are some that I have gotten all the way to finished status, and one bubble was driving me nuts, and I'd start digging at it and couldn't get it out. I'd dig, and eventually I'd have the whole thing sanded back off and start over. So very frustrating, but I started to find better ways to seal the wood before I put my coating on. So one that I was using was just a regular wood sanding sealer, which works pretty good, but it's got its drawbacks also. When you go to sand it, it almost kind of gums up your paper, and it doesn't dry really. I don't know. It worked okay. It floods the wood. You can sand it. You got to be careful and use a high or a low grit paper when you sand it, but it was working okay. But that's one of the ones that I had that the edge delaminated. I had used that first, so I get nervous using it because the other part of the problem is when I go to put my coating on, I was doing the sanding sealer with this. When you go to brush, if you brush this way one time, you get a little ridge right here at the end, and you got to be so careful how you brush these out and kind of just tap the end, because you don't want to build up on the end, because when it dries, it's thick and it's not tight to the woods, and you put your super glue on and that little bit comes off. Anyway, so sanding sealer, it works okay, but not my favorite. And then I started using this, which is again a sealer, glue, and finish, and this stuff is awesome. I remember my neighbor's mom back home, she used to use this and make all kinds of crafty projects, and she would embed like magazine pictures on pieces of wood and just all kinds of stuff. But it always seemed like what's that old school crafty stuff, Mod Podge. It is actually really nice for what I do, and it dries hard. It's actually dishwasher safe. This is it's actually really been working well for what I do. So once I get to this stage, I go ahead and separate the pieces. Now I've got double-sided tape in here, which I gotta get rid of. But totally worth it to have something thin like this and be able to hold them together, man. I had tried a lot of different ways before double-sided tape, and nothing works better than this. But something else I'm going to mention, and it's really important. When I take this off, I want to make sure I keep them in the same orientation, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, because I've sanded them even, but only one way. And what I mean by that is I will take this, take this, and this is up. So I tried drawing it on with a pencil. I tried a bunch of different ways, but just as easy to mark a little X at the top, so I know to keep them both this direction. And that way, when I put them back together, they still match up. They're still nice and even. And it doesn't matter which way I put my emblem on or whatever, but for the most part, from here on out, I'm going to say they both match up this direction. And the reason I started cutting an X kind of deep on the backside is because if I go to sand the backside flat, it would sand my pencil mark off, I'd lose it, whatever. That X, I'm still going to be able to see, even if I do a little sanding on it. So anyway, I've get them to this stage basically, and relatively smooth and finished. These ones are going to need a little bit more before I'm ready to coat them, but I will kind of show you what I do from here on out. So, easiest thing I have found is pieces of cardboard, obviously. But the reason I do it is because it's kind of portable and disposable. More importantly than that is keeping the pieces off the cardboard. So you can use some double-sided foam tape. What I'll normally do is maybe take a little piece of this, and I actually want it even a little more off there like that. So I also have some of these, which I got. They're just little scrapbooking craft dots. Let's stick these guys on here. Actually, do it this way. I usually use the craft dots directly on the wood, but take a piece of this and if I could find a thinner version than the 1/2 inch, it would be ideal, but for now, especially working on these small ones, do this. And the reason I do 2 layers is for a couple of reasons. It holds it higher up off the cardboard, and if I don't peel the first one, this piece will release from here, so I can kind of work on them, pop them off, and keep reusing the same piece of cardboard until I'm kind of finished coating them. But I will take scales, stick them down onto here, try and stay in frame. The reason I cut them in half is because I don't want that foam all the way out to the edge, because when I go to cover it, especially when I start with super glue, if it runs over the edge and sticks to the tape, then I got a big blob at the back. It's just a lot cleaner to have a thin strip down the middle. However, this part also need to be kind of careful about, that this is nice and flat and level, and that's why I kind of started using this flat 3M tape, because when you go to start coating it, these two pieces have to be sitting level, because the surface tension of the glue will have a tendency to build up on one side. If they're leaning a little bit one way or the other, you'll get a a high ridge. Yeah, no, I definitely don't work with ivory. And as a side note, I don't really like working with any kind of bone products because it stinks. It smells like the dentist is drilling your teeth. I will get to abalone in a little bit here because I do use that, but man, I don't like to run the Dremel even on abalone because it smells so bad. But anyway, so once I get them to this stage, take a little bit of Mod Podge and brush. And give it a nice thin coat. This is the part I usually do late at night when nobody's up and I can just sit around and work and not be bothered by anybody. But I'll cut all my blanks and run the belt sander and everything and get them all done ahead of time, so I have a pile of stuff I can work on late hours. But once these guys are coated, that effectively seals all the little pores, and this stuff works really good for sealing this. So the next thing is going to be setting the inlay or whatever I'm going to do as kind of decoration. And for the most part, I like the way they look best with the original shield, and I just think it looks really classy on there. Now this one has been hit with the Mod Podge, and I set the shield in the Mod Podge, which that's a whole story on its own. But I have these shields that have been removed from the original scales, and they are really thin. However, they're still thick enough that it takes a little bit of coating to get them covered. Can I get this thing out of here? So this is where a lot of my nightmare really begins. So got the shield. I want to attach it onto here. I also sometimes do abalone. I've never seen the ones that I do with abalone, but I would just take, find a suitable piece, something that I like, kind of hold it on here, figure out how I like the way it looks, and then figure out how to set it. Again, that's something that took a lot of trial and error. At first I was trying to, carve out a space underneath of it and set the abalone in there as an inlay, which extremely labor intensive, especially with random pieces. If I was doing maybe circles of abalone, no big deal. I just, drill out a circle with a router. I like the random piece look, so I needed to figure out a way to set these effectively. And I actually kind of figured out a little hack for putting the abalone on here that looks like an inlay but is not. And back to my friend double-sided tape. If I can find my other roll. Oh, there we go. This one's almost empty, but I would take a little piece of double-sided tape. Not much, just a little square. Stick it to my finger. And then on a flat piece of glass with sandpaper, just start sanding this piece nice and flat so it sits flat on the scale. But more importantly than that, what I'm trying to get to, besides just a nice flat back, is a nice sharp edge all the way around. Because once you've got a nice sharp edge on the backside and basically no edge reveal showing, once it comes down to a nice kind of knife edge, I found that when you then lay it on the piece of wood, and I didn't sand this one all the way down so you're not going to be able to tell, but once you lay it on the piece of wood and stick it down and then bed it in the coating, since the edge comes down and contacts the wood all the way around, it looks like it's inlaid, but it's really just set in the coating and on top. It was a very good discovery and much easier than trying to carve them in there, so that's the way I've been doing it with the abalone stuff. Back to the Victorinox Shield, and I know this is the part that I get questions about all the time, is how I set the shield. So again, like I said, it is not very thick, and my lighting in here is not going to do me any favors with that, but basically it is like maybe a sheet of paper thick, and it is stainless, so it's it's able to be kind of sanded and whatnot, but Got to make sure they're flat first, because if they're kind of out of whack from popping them out, they're not going to sand right, they're not going to sit right. So I will take that and make some space here. Take a John, I think you will recognize these guys. These are absolutely super handy, and I use them all the time, so thank you. I very much appreciate these. But I will take this little and first thing I normally do is take it and flatten the back, because the back side, where they heat press this into the plastic, the backside kind of has some ridges and bumps and whatnot. It's not like perfectly smooth like the front. So I usually take the backside first, put it on, sanding block, and flatten the backside. And then once the backside is flat, I'll flip it over and put it face down. Make sure I got the right side here. Yeah, put it face down on a piece of this high grit. This is, I think, either 15 or 2500. Take my finger, stick it down. And the reason I kind of do it like this, I've tried a lot of different ways, but this mat that I use, this is a piece of granite that's on, or slate that's on my workbench here. And then I have it's like a countertop, one of those mats you see at the store that they sit on the counter, a counter mat basically, and I flip it over, and the backside rubber has good traction, but it also has just enough cushion to it that when I push my finger down on this thing, it sands it really evenly. It actually works better than trying to sand it on glass. It kind of conforms to my finger, and this is just the best way that I've found so far to do this. But I will just take the tip of my finger and start sanding the face of the shield here. And then, you see, I go a step beyond what Victorinox does. Theirs are not like highly polished like that, but I think they look really good once I'm all set. So I do take the time to prepare each shield and just make sure that sucker is as shiny as possible before I stick it back in. Kind of a mutual unspoken agreement, I think, between Victorinox. They actually liked one of my postings the other day, which is a huge validation that I'm, headed in the right direction, and hopefully not going to get in trouble for reusing their trademarked logo. It's kind of legal gray area on their website, but hopefully they can see that I'm making their stuff look good and, reusing their logo as it should be. I'm not making clones and sticking this on there, so hopefully they don't have a problem. But when they liked my Instagram post the other day, it did feel really good. So once I get the shield like this, I do have to figure out a way to stick it down. Before I do that, I know I'm going to get a question from somebody on how these came to be and how you get the original shield out of there. So before I go any farther, let me demonstrate popping one out of here. And this discovery was really what kind of started this all for me. I was just getting a bunch of these from auction and buying and reselling, and I had made some Koa Tucson scales, but the whole thing for the Swiss Army knife, it hadn't really dawned on me. I mean, it sounds dumb, but a couple years ago, I didn't even realize how easy it was to pop these off. I just never thought about it. I never thought of a Swiss Army knife as being able to be disassembled. It just didn't occur to me. One of those things. But I started to, get into them a little bit more, and I want to give a shout out to a really good friend of mine. His Instagram is Bow and Oak Knives, and I will try and link that in the description if I can remember. But Bernard's a great friend of mine. We kind of, buy, sell, trade, back and forth, and auction hunt, whatnot, and just an awesome guy. Huge wealth of knowledge. Swiss Army knives, and yeah, so when I started down that Swiss Army knife rabbit hole, I ended up getting one from the auction that the scale was kind of messed up, and realized that the shield was actually falling out of there. So it didn't take me long to figure out, and you know, a lot of people that pop these scales off want to reuse them, put them on knives, whatever. Me, obviously I don't care, so figured out if you take this, there's one little hole in the back that you can, you know, stick a pin in and push it, but I find that that dents the shield, so I can't really do that. I need to figure out a way to get this out of here effectively. And the easiest way I found is just to kind of take this guy and start bending it until see that it starts to come loose a little bit. Catch it with the edge of my fingernail, and voila, we are removed, and this is rubbish at this point. But that's how I am getting them out of there, and I think I have enough for a while, but again, you do have to make sure that they are flat more than anything, so when you do it that way, they do come out fairly flat, and it doesn't mangle them. But now, from here, getting them set was part of the challenge, and a few different methods. I use a lot of wooden picks and skewers and stuff because it's, you know, the easiest thing I found to kind of push stuff around and glue, but I will line it up, make sure it's where I want, usually either measure it, or I have another one that I use as my template to make sure it's centered up, and then I got to figure out a way to stick it down. What I was doing was trying to put, you know, a drop of super glue on the shield and stick it down like that, and then start coating the whole thing with the super glue. That would leave a bump over the shield. A lot of times it would get a bubble because there's a little bit of air under the edges. It was okay, but it wasn't working great. But once I started using the Mod Podge, it was a lot easier. Basically, I just wipe a coat of that on, drop this thing in, press it in there, make sure it's centered, let it dry, and then I can put a couple more coats of the Mod Podge over it, and then it's ready for super glue. But this one is at that stage where I've already stuck it down. It's had a couple of coats, and this one is ready to start coating with super glue. So once I get them to this stage, the real fun begins. This brush in bottle super glue I have found to be the easiest thing for me. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that I've tried. You know, tried wiping it on with a paper towel. That doesn't work. Basically, super glue dries in, you know, a couple of seconds. So very, very short time window for putting this stuff on, and it's got to be accurate, it's got to be right, and you don't have much time to do it. So I'm actually going to stick these ones all the way down so they don't move around while I'm trying to glue them. And for the first time ever recorded, here is my insanity with trying to coat these suckers, and I'm glad there's only 6 of you watching. In case I screw up royally, I'm just not going to upload this video, so whoever's still in here, good luck. Bear with me, because this is definitely an involved process, but like I said, I make sure that they're both sitting as flat and as level as I can. And I will first start by hitting the edges on these guys, because the edges are what I've found to be one of those parts that later on, when I start sanding, that can make or break whether it works out. And what I mean by that is, once you get the whole thing coated, you can see it's nice and shiny with the Mod Podge and with the coating, put the super glue on it. If you start sanding and you burn through all of your coating all the way back down to bare wood, it will leave a lighter spot that you can tell wasn't wasn't actually coated the same or at the same time or whatever, and I mean, it just sticks right out at me. So what I found is the edges are where you're most of the time going to have that burn, because once I coat this with super glue, then I got to start sanding, and if my sandpaper is not dead flat or just come through the edge a little bit, it'll burn through. So what I normally do is start coating this thing all the way around the edge and build up my edge a little bit higher first, and then when I sand, I have a little bit of forgiveness right at that edge. So I'll coat. Yeah, so the gel I don't really care for. What I do, I don't actually go completely thin. This Gorilla Glue is kind of a medium viscosity. So this is original viscosity in the bottle. Basically, I'll take and mix this and a thin, and this is my mix bottle. So it's kind of halfway. It's like a medium thin, and it gives you a little bit more dry time, and it's still thin enough to flood and to coat and whatnot. So I mean, I've tried so many different super glues, and I really found that it's just easiest to make my own blend, and I tend to mess up the brushes pretty often, so I don't want to get, a big bottle or whatever. I can't actually find anybody that sells just the brushes, like in a big pack, so for now, this seems to work, but I will build up my edges all the way around here, even getting it kind of up onto the top a little bit. And what you don't realize is how thick the stuff actually dries. It doesn't seem like it. It seems really thin, but when you go to start sanding it, it'll feel like a mountain trying to sand it down to smooth. And super glue is very hard stuff. It's hard to sand through, it's hard to cut through, so I would rather it be a little high than too low and trying to sand out, low spots and burn through. So I'd rather build it up a little bit and have that bit of forgiveness. So once I get my edges coated, give that a second. I usually set them this direction because I found brushing this way is way more accurate than brushing this direction, but if I keep dipping, it's hard to actually get this accurate. So I'll take this bottle, like I said, that I mixed, and usually just make sure I'm in frame here before I get rolling. So make sure that there's no air bubbles here, because even the smallest air bubble on the surface here, like right now in that little puddle I just made, I know you can't see it on camera, but there's one air bubble, and to get that air bubble out, it's so small, the surface tension doesn't want to let it release. So it's one of those things, you don't want to just squeeze the bottle and squeeze a bunch of air into the glue. That's something that I found can mess my day up. But I will just take this guy, start moving this puddle around, and I have found this to be the most effective way to do them in the least amount of coats. Now, when I first started looking into this, and the guys that use it on the lathe and whatnot saying put it on with a piece of paper towel, they were wiping coat after coat after coat to build it up, which I didn't think was necessary. So I just had to figure out a way to get it thick and accurate enough to leave it like that. And this is where my insanity really began. So what I'm showing is pretty much like I said, the best way that I have found so far. But once I get this coated here, we'll see. edges and any bubbles. If there's a little bubble, you'll be able to see it, and sometimes you can just grab it with the corner of the brush, pull it off to the side, and kind of get it off of here. But once I get them like this, this is, I don't know that I'm going to be able to show it effectively, but basically the surface tension is self-leveling that super glue because I've left enough of it on there. If I start wiping it off, you start to get streaks and air bubbles, and even the smallest brush stroke, when you know, if I would wipe this back off with the brush, even those small brush strokes feel like mountains when you try and sand it. So what I found is it's best trying to get it over the level of the shield and embed that in there so it's, you know, basically covered over. And it needs to be pretty thick, and even though this looks like, you know, a thick puddle, when it dries to, you know, a quarter of what it looks like here, and it becomes really, really kind of bumpy on top as it dries if you put it on way too thick or you use the medium. But there's another product that you can hit it with. This is an activator. So this has also been kind of a trial and error process. But right now, if I would, you know, hold this can back 10 inches and give it one quick mist, it would instantly start to set the super glue, but it would set it from the outside in. So it would leave like kind of an orange peel texture to it. And I'll show you. This was a screw up piece, so don't mind this. But basically, this is one that I cut the cutout the wrong direction, so I use this to kind of mess around with coding and try different stuff. But this is one that hit with the Mod Podge, covered the whole thing, flooded it, and then hit it with the activator. And you can see it gives kind of like a orange peel or a matte finish texture, which if you can get this to come out perfect, it actually looks really cool. And the amount of times that I've had two scales come out perfect like this has been, you know, maybe one or two. So it's not easy to spray it and have it be perfect, because what'll happen is with a puddle this thick, yeah, this is hey, how's it going, guys? You're all the way to the good part. So but what'll happen is if you spray this puddle with the activator, it'll start to dry from the outside in, and when it does that, it's squeezing that puddle, so all the liquid that's left underneath as the outside dries and shrinks, it'll find one little spot and it will squeeze that extra material out. Now this is a minor little squeeze out. A lot of times it'll come out the side and it'll just be like, and like a crystallized mound of super glue will squeeze out because that was still wet underneath as it dries. So it's really tough to get the activator to work right. It has its own problems, obviously. I've done a couple that worked out. Basically, this little bump that squeezed out of there, not a big deal if you handle it right. There are some little air bubbles trapped in that bubble, so as long as you shave it off properly all the way down below the air bubble that's sitting in the top of it and sand it properly. I found a diamond file for shaving these all the way down to flat, and then start with your sanding, normally, you know, 320 and then all the way up. But this bump, as long as you don't mess with it, as long as you don't try to wipe it or dig it or whatever, you can usually still get away with that. So I've had some come out okay, but what I also find is, I doubt my camera's going to pick it up, but in that puddle, when I have it sitting like this, you can't even see them, they're so small, but there's little teeny tiny like microscopic bubbles still in there that when you hit it with the activator, all those bubbles get trapped underneath, and you can see kind of, you know, the bubbling. If the bubble is in between the coating, no big deal. It's pretty much, you know, it's basically optically clear, so once you polish the top, you can't really see the bubbles. Maybe from one direction you can kind of see them, but more often than not, what'll happen is you'll go to start sanding, and one of those bubbles was in between the layer but closer to the top. So now you've got a round bubble. You sand the top open, you have a depression of a bubble. As you're sanding it, like I said, super glue turns white when you sand it. You have all that white dust fill in that little bubble, and then it's very, very difficult to get it back out of there. You know, I find it's the biggest problem when you're wet sanding, because you can't see it happening as you're wet sanding. Then all of a sudden you wipe it, you clean it, you think the piece, and it dries, and you've got all these little white spots because you couldn't tell while you were wet sanding. So I usually save wet sanding until I get up over like 800 grit, and I know the thing is sanded completely the way I want it. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to start, like I said, with a piece of really low grit paper. Let me move this one out of the way so I don't get dust in it. But what'll happen is you'll start to sand, right? Actually, I'm gonna set this guy on the box of shame for a minute. Hopefully not, though. That one should come out alright. So once you start sanding this stuff, I found it's easiest to just hit it with the low grit paper, dry. You know, and this is like a 220, I think I said. And what you're trying to do is get the super glue all to turn white. And what I mean by that is, as you're sanding, what's up, Stevie? So as you're sanding, and I'm not actually trying to do this as a finished piece. This is a screw up for anybody just tuning in. So I'm really just doing this as an example, so I can kind of show you what not to do and what to do on it. But start to sand this guy, and it'll look like, oh wow, okay, I got the whole thing sanded, everything's, you know, looking white. Right there you've got an air bubble that I opened up and I now filled in with dust. More than that, if you wipe this dust off, you'll see you have barely sanded anything at all, because super glue is so incredibly hard that it really takes a lot to get all the way down to a sanded finish. So let's see if my camera picks it up. All those shiny spots are low spots in the coating. The dull areas are areas that I've hit. So gotta sit here with a nice low grit paper. Usually 220 works best. Make sure it doesn't clog. That's the other reason for this rubber mat. It works great for unclogging my paper. But I'll just sit here and try and sand this all out until I get all of my low spots. And this is where it becomes important that you build up enough of a coating, because you're sitting here sanding, you hit the edge just a little bit too much and you burn through the edge, and then you really got to start the process over. So I'm going to focus on this end because this was a little bit nicer than the top. The top is really bad. So I would get this guy here with 220 until it's basically all even. And you got to keep going back and wiping this off and checking to see. And any little shiny spot, you can see a shiny spot at the end, a little bit on the sides. Any of those shiny spots are still low spots in the coating. So you really got to keep going until you get all the way down. Now, if I wasn't going to take this to a super high polish, I guess it wouldn't matter all that much if there was a couple, you know, depressions or whatnot. You could really sand this up to like, you know, 800 and hit it with compound, and it would look okay. It would be shiny, it would look fine. But then when you hold it in the light, you see little divots and depressions and whatnot. So I'm trying to get as much of that out as possible and make this thing look glassy smooth. That was always my goal for them, part of my OCD, I guess, and trying to make them all look perfect. But so I'm trying to get every bit of this coating to not have any shiny spots to it, because that way I know it's all sanded to the same level. And even with this 220 paper, it's going to leave some scratches, but as long as they're all basically at the same level. So go around the end here. I'm not going to worry about edges. Edges are a whole other story. Basically, you want to go around here and start evening out, because as you're brushing, whatever, you got streaks, you got spots. So the edge, especially between the edge and the top, right on the radius, you got to be real careful that that's, you know, nice and smooth, but you don't go through too far. So make sure everything's sanded up, and then wipe the dust away, look in the light, and make sure there's no more shiny spots. Now, this would be a big divot. That's actually a big white bubble of sanding dust. From here to here is pretty much good, and I'm trying to get the whole piece to that level right there, all sanded evenly. So from 220, move on usually to a piece of 400, and then go over it again. Now 400, you can still take out some of the high spots and shape it a little bit. Focus in here. You can see down at the end there's still some shiny spots. So those shiny spots, this is still low spots. Now there's a couple ways to handle the low spots. I don't want to really keep digging with the 220, because then I'll risk going through the edge and have to start over. With the 400, even 600 a little bit, you can still kind of go through here and even it out. But when I tell you, you can sit here and sand and sand and sand with a piece of 400, and you'll be sanding for 10 minutes and think you got so far, and then you go to wipe it away and there's still that same low spot. Super glue is so friggin' hard that you really need the low grit paper to cut through it and to take off any material. Once you're up 400 up to 600, you're really just kind of shining it, and it's hard to take any away with that. So you'll be polishing the top and you'll still have your little low spot. So 400 is really where I want to make sure I focus in on making sure that coating looks really, really nice and even. And then the 400 is going to take out a lot of the scratches from the 220. So I'll go over this whole thing like this until it, again, nice and even all the way. Wipe this away. Check it again in the light. And my camera's not going to like that. So again, I would say from here to here is all pretty good. I don't see any major shiny spots. So this I could get smooth at this point. These little divots, if I were to try and sand all the way down below that divot right there, it doesn't look like a lot, but it's a crater as far as super glue is concerned. So if I got stuff like this going on, as long as there's no dust buildup in that bubble, you can wipe it off, you can hit it with some water, whatever, make sure there's no white spot sitting right there. If it's just a divot or a low spot, you can go back and put another layer of super glue over top of it. No problem. You can fill it in. That's where I might use a paper towel and just wipe it on so I don't have, you know, brush strokes or whatever. I've tried a lot of different methods for putting it on. I actually found this kind of foam rubber that I can wipe super glue on with that puts it on nice and smooth, and it doesn't dry to the rubber real quick. So anyway, if you got to put a layer over it, that's fine. However, if you've already hit this with the activator, that activator is in the super glue, and as soon as you touch another bit of super glue to it, it sets instantly. It takes a lot of wet sanding to get all the way down through that top layer before you can put another coat on without the activator affecting it, which is why I kind of got away from using the activator in the first place. That's how a lot of my brushes turn into rocks, because I'll get it like this, I'll be like, oh, I need one coat, go to brush a coat on, sets my brush instantly, turns into a rock, and I gotta throw it away. So I usually, you know, try and shoot for no bubbles if I can, but that's the activator story. It's a really nice option if used properly, but it's tricky to get it exactly right. So once I get it, sanded up like this, that's when I'll move to like a piece of 600, and with the 600, I'm trying to get, more of the scratches out. But basically at this point, you're starting to polish the surface. You're not really taking much material off, and you'll see it start to get kind of shiny from the 600. And this is where I'm really trying to get it nice and smooth and even, and just confirm that there's no divots or low spots. So for that part, I would call that good down at that end. And from here, you can move up to a piece of 800 and start with wet sanding it. So get a little bit of water here and take a little bit of my paper, just dip and give it a nice wet sand, kind of go in circles, getting the scratches out, going back with the grain. And this is really, the start of your polishing stage. I consider like 800 kind of where I start the polishing. And I've seen a lot of different people that, take it up to 800 and then just hit it with compound and call it good. And that's, it's totally fine. But basically, at this point, it's starting to polish out. And I don't see any spots or anything, so I would call that pretty good. You've got to get around the edges, got to get all the way up and around the top. This cutout is actually a pain in the butt to make sure all these edges are even and polished. But anyway, once I get it all hit with 800, dry it off, make sure it looks good. Now, when you start with the wet sanding, this is where you can tell if you screwed up. Because up until this point, you were doing everything dry. If you happen to sand all the way through one of the edges, you might not notice it right away because it's still, everything's kind of white from the dust, and you might not notice it. But as soon as you wet sand it, if you burn through an edge, that edge will turn dark when it's wet, and then as soon as the water evaporates, it'll turn really, really light. And that is a screw up. That's epic screw up, and there's a couple ways to fix it, but that's what I'm trying to avoid at all cost, is burning through that edge. Now, that being said, I did find interesting product for doing fingernails. This is an acrylic kit. Now, I've never actually put on acrylic fingernails. I probably could, but I got this because it said acrylic liquid, and again, I don't know what's actually in this stuff. Nobody can really tell me what monomer is. However, what I found is that this, when you put it on an area that you have a little white spot like that, it'll give you a second where that liquid acrylic, because this is an acrylic, CA glue is cyanoacrylate. The acrylate is acrylic. This is acrylic liquid. So the surface tension of this is really low. It can get into some of my little spots. So I have found that this stuff can kind of save you in a pinch if you need to. However, it's also got its tricks and drawbacks. But take liquid acrylic. Say you've got some white spots on here in your coating. You can, and this is assuming you haven't hit it with the activator, because that's a different story. But if you just have some white spots that you're trying to get out, I found you can take some of this liquid acrylic and kind of fill them in for the most part. If they're kind of sanded evenly. Now, it's not perfect, but it's kind of a fix. And the spots that you still see are ones that are underneath the level of the coating. These are not opened up. I didn't sand the top open, so these aren't filled in with dust. The one that was filled in with dust goes right here, and it kind of disappears as soon as you hit it with the liquid acrylic. So it'll give you, maybe 25-30 seconds where the surface looks wet, no white dust. And then, if you very quickly put some super glue on it, it can fill that in, and it stays kind of optically clear, I guess, and you can't tell where that spot was. So this stuff has saved me a few times in a pinch, and it's the only thing that I've found that can kind of work like that. But it agrees with the super glue. It doesn't, for the most part, it doesn't screw up my brush. It is compatible with super glue for whatever it's worth. So that bubble, that really bad white spot, was right here, and now it's just a low spot. There's no white dust trapped in it, and I could take super glue. Probably would just take one drop of super glue, put it right on there, let it dry so it has kind of a mound, and then shave it back off. The thing about super glue that I found is you can continue to build it up, sand it down, build it up, sand it down as many times as you need to, as long as you're not trapping a bunch of white powder in between the layers. Say you sanded it with 220, you're going to get track marks from the sandpaper. If you don't clean it off completely and then you coat over it again, you'll see streaks of white where the dust is trapped in the track from the grit. So a lot of ones that I've screwed up were exactly that. I didn't clean it completely, I didn't go to the next grit properly, whatever, and some got trapped. I coated it again, I was in a rush, whatever. What I found works is some 91% isopropyl alcohol, spray the thing until it's clean, and then make sure there's no dust before you start coating over it again. But you can really coat as many times as you, and I've gotten the super glue pretty thick to where, you know, if I was trying to cover an inlay that stuck up too high or whatever, I just really need to build it up. You can keep putting layer after layer and it will still come out, you know, clear and glassy if you shine it right. I have noticed there's a little bit of issue with different kinds of super glue. Like if I go from one brand to the other or a thin to the medium and do a coat, sometimes if you get all the way through that coat, you can just barely see where you're into the next coat, which will look like a little whatever. And it's hard to notice until you put the thing up in the light, but then you're like, oh, that's two different sections. If you sand and polish, you either got to go all the way back down to one or coat over it again. But basically, you can keep building it up and it's going to be clear as long as you polish it out. Now, I've been talking and talking. I'm going to make a disclaimer. I am by no means an expert. This is all trial and error. If anyone has any suggestions, has a better way to do this, if you think I'm crazy for doing it this way, that's fine. I appreciate all feedback, and this has just been my trial and error process. Do not take anything I say as truth or fact. This is more of a don't try this at home type of video, because you might end up going crazy. But once I get it to that stage, I would take it, and I'm up to 800. I would normally go to one of the discs, like the 1200, the 1500, the 2500. And then once I've gotten up to 2500, I have some of this, these sanding pad. This is a 3000 grit foam pad, and just kind of wet sand with this guy. And I did skip a few grits, but I'm not trying to finish this one completely. So basically just kind of start to polish it out with this guy. And even from 800 to 3000 is, it's still going to look nice. It's not going to be like glass finish, but it's still going to look pretty nice. So get that wiped off, and you can tell that's, it's coming out pretty shiny. Now from here, I either hit it on the buffing wheel, which, as long as you're careful and you don't get it too hot, you can hit it on the buffing wheel and this will look nice and perfectly glassy. Or a little bit of Flitz polish on paper towel and just really work it in there, and the Flitz polish will make it shiny. So all of that being said, I have kind of gone through all of the finishing stages, I think. This is one that has been coated with super glue and is bedded thick enough. This one I would need, again, to start at 220 and go all the way up, but this one is basically ready to go. I've got a couple of them ready to go. Once I get them all the way finished and polished and they look good and they're ready to go, then you got to deal with the backside. And before I finish the whole back, I kind of miss this stage in between, but usually when they're Mod Podged or after the first coat of super glue, I'll take them off of here, I'll flip them over, and I'll drill the backs. Sometimes I'll just go through and drill all the backs, with I don't know which side I want. Anyway, so before you start doing your final polish, you put your divots on the back so there's space to set it in, but you have the edge of super glue and then you've got the raw wood in the back. I usually coat this back also with super glue and make sure that I don't have a space here. So this thing is basically flooded all the way around and encapsulated with super glue. So now, as long as it's flat, I usually lay it down, flatten it on the glass, coat it again, check it, polish it, buff it, ready to go. Okay. Once they are completely ready to go and get both of them looking good, the last thing to do really is just attach it onto body of the knife. And this is after cleaning, polishing, doing whatever I need. A lot of the ones that I use are pre-owned, but I don't use any that have been used. So the tools are all perfect, no scratches. The knife itself, the scales might have been dirty, it might have some junk in the liners. So I'll take them apart, I will throw them in the ultrasonic cleaner, get all the junk out of it, and then go through with a little bit of polish and polish the whole thing up, clean the insides up, and make sure it looks, looks perfect. And that's again where the OCD kicks in. But I also, for a lot of them, you got to worry about the liners. So I will take, some of this really high grit paper, and I will polish up the edge of the liners, so that looks really good. What's up, Joe? How's it going? Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's been a lot of trial and error to get this finish proper, but I figured I'd spill the beans on it today. I've been asked so many times, oh, how do you do that? How do you do that? I was going to make a video, like I said before, but it just seemed like a daunting task to make a video, edit it, get all your shots right, show different stages. I feel like I'm just kind of talking to you guys at this point, so it seemed a little easier this way. But once I get the knife, cleaned up and polished, then the other important step is manipulating it. And what I mean by that is take my handy little Nip-X, and you gotta look, see if I can catch it at the right angle. Basically, what you'll see is that with their plastic scales, they don't care about a little bit of variation, but you can see those liners are squeezed out a little bit, so you need them to be kind of in like this. So I'll just, take my pliers, and it's just stainless. I'll kind of squeeze them a little bit, manipulate them, make sure that it's nice and flat. So when I stick my scales on, there's a bunch of space at the ends. So it does take a little bit of massaging to get these right. But once I get both sides set, get them to where liners look flat, I will take and put the scales on, and this also is where my little X's come in handy, because this one could be upside down, so nice that I marked it. But take this guy, this one on here, and make sure that when I hold it up to the light, I don't have a bunch of space in there, and that they're sitting nice and tight and flat on there. And I do cut the pockets in the back a little oversized because I want to have room to move it around. And since every one of these is done by hand and hand fitted, they're all just slightly different. So me having that hole in the back just a little oversized allows me to make sure that this is exactly where I want it with the right reveal all the way around. I do like the edge to kind of be proud from the liner just a little bit though, because I think it feels nicer. You're not feeling the edge of the liner. And also, I don't know, I'm just kind of like it that way. So just a little hair over the liner, make sure that they're even, and then I'll just mix up some 2-part epoxy and put 1 drop in each of these. Stick this guy on here, stick this one on here. Usually put a rubber band around the middle to hold it in place. Make sure it's set, everything even, and then let it sit and dry like that for 5-10 minutes. Make sure it's perfect. And that's it. That's pretty much the process, start to finish. I don't think I forgot anything, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. I know that was more than an hour of explanation, but that's condensing 2 years of my bullshit into 1 hour, so not too bad, I guess. But for you guys that are in here, 10 of you guys and 14 likes, so thank you guys. I really appreciate it. This was a very unannounced, stealthy type live stream, and like I said, I did it at the same time that that Neves was on, so I wouldn't have a huge crowd over here. I find it's really hard to keep up with comments and working on stuff too, so hopefully this explained a few things. I mean, the only other things that I kind of wanted to talk about, and Stevie, since you're in here, I will show this also, and this is kind of something that I've been working on, but the palm trees. So, well, you say it's better than Neves, but I haven't started sharpening them yet, so bear with me, I do get to that point. So, the palm trees, again, trial and error. The first ones that I cut, I kind of stumbled across this by accident, but I like to repurpose and reuse materials. I don't know if any of you guys recognize this. I'm not sure how old everybody in here is, but you can see how much storage space this 3.5-inch floppy disk had. Huge storage, but yeah, I found that little piece that slides on a floppy disk, popped this off, and it's the right type of metal. It's aluminum, I believe, on most of them, and it's just thick enough to be stiff, but still thin enough that I can cut it with scissors. So this was the type of metal that I was looking for, and basically I will just cut a piece of it out. I will first draw it out with a pencil, draw my tree on there, and then I'll take a little, like a little Dremel point, and start etching the tree, basically the trunk lines, and etch the leaves, and just make it look. Yes, those are some Elementum scales, and those are on my list. I've got quite a few. I have not forgotten about you, sir, by any means. They're on my list, but you, in fact, got one of the nicest looking pieces of wood possible, and this doesn't look like anything special until you get it wet, but it's a really nice looking piece of koa once this is sanded all up and polished. On its way. But anyway, so I started using this and cut a couple out of it. It worked okay. Then I wanted some brass because I found a Swiss Army knife. Basically the shield that they use on the Victorinox, the new ones, everything, I don't know what year they switched them over, but they used to be nickel silver. Now they're stainless. So the nickel silver piece, it just kind of hits a little different. It looks different than the stainless. It's got almost a gold tint in the light, and I was doing a I was doing a Victorinox Champ, and I wanted it to really pop, and I knew I wanted to do a brass palm tree instead of the silver with the old style shield. So I found some of this stuff, which is brass shim stock, and yeah, the floppy disk. Like I said, I knew if I posted some of this and actually showed people everything, you might think I'm kind of loony. I mean, this is not any professional shop. So anybody that thinks that I'm, sitting out here and making professional knives, no sir. These are all one-off, custom, trial and error, repurposed, recycle, upscale. I like to do budget knives for that reason. It's, I'm working on getting myself to a certain place. I feel like I might be, I don't know, a quarter of the way there, but there's always room for improvement. But I did find some of this brass shim stock pack of this stuff, a couple different thicknesses in here. The one works pretty good, but same thing, same idea. Cut it out, whatever. And that's one of them. Yes, I am a loony mad scientist. I mean, some of the other stuff that I've come up with, like I said, I went through the whole process of cleaning and setting the shield. And the reason I do the shield like I do is because underneath that coating, it really gives it a nice look. It's sitting on top of the wood, but under the coating, and it gives it kind of that 3D look. I tried it the other way, and getting back to the one that I puddled with super glue, you can see even that puddle of thin is only partway dry at this point, so I won't tip it and change the level, but it takes a while. If you've got a puddle that thick, it takes a while to dry, but as long as you don't disturb it, no bubbles, this will dry and lay down to this right here. This I didn't touch. I just laid on a puddle, let it dry, and it's pretty good. There's no trapped air bubbles, there's no big dings or chunks or divots, so as long as you do them properly and let them sit, they'll come out like this. And from here, I'm like, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 minutes away from sanding and polishing this one to where it's, looking good. So set this guy off to the side. And let me dig in the old box of shame because there's some other stuff I wanted to show you in here. But basically, one of the other things that I tried was actually embedding the shield into the wood, which I tried this in the very beginning when I first started doing them. And that's what I'm saying. If anybody has any of my earlier versions, feel free to post them up, tag a picture on Instagram. I'd love to see how they've held up, because once they leave and they go out into the world, I have no idea, unless somebody contacts me and there's a problem, which there have been 2 or 3 that, something happened with them. It didn't work right. So please let me know if anything ever goes wrong. I'm happy to fix it, happy to take care of it, send it back, I'll make you a new one, whatever. That's why I don't work on $800 knives. But so I tried to set the shield in the wood in the beginning, and I needed a way to make an indentation. I will get to the Archbishop in a minute. That's next on my list. It's right over there. So trying to get the thing set in the wood. I mean, again, here's how loony I am. I would take the shield, take one of these guys, set it on the wood, and wanted to figure out a way to press it into the wood. Tried a couple different things. Basically, if you set it down on here, Co is pretty hard to begin with, but I took it was actually a socket extension, but it was nice, smooth chrome. I would roll it over like a rolling pin and would get an indentation in the wood. Yeah, it worked okay. It was enough that when I'd set the shield in there, it wouldn't move around. It would kind of hold it in that place. And thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. It's definitely been, I like a challenge, and I wanted to feel like I was doing justice. And like I said the other day, when the actual main account for Victorinox in Switzerland clicked like on my post with one of these, that was like just a little bit of validation, and it felt really good that not only am I not in trouble for using their logo, but somebody over there, some Swiss guy in their main factory office, social media guy, whatever, went, oh wow, that looks nice, and clicked like on my stuff. So that was very cool. But anyway, so to bed this little shield, I figure I've got a pile of them, and what I'm trying to do is make a depression, right? So I stacked up a couple of them until they were, I think I stacked 4 or 5, so it's still, less than 1/8 of an inch. So the first piece I put it on was a little round piece of stainless. The problem was when I'd set it onto the wood, I couldn't see the shield, so if it was cockeyed just a little bit or off or whatever, and I'd go to press it down in, if I screwed it up, that was it. So I needed something different. So tried this, and excuse the fact that it's kind of a not a rectangle or a square, and it does kind of bug my OCD a little bit, but a little scrap of acrylic that I had, and I took 5 of these shields, super glued together, and stacked them up and made a die for pressing into the wood. And this actually works just fine. Different pieces of koa work a little different. Like if I were to try and press it into this one, you see how it's got that black streak running through there? This streak is really, really hard, so it would probably kind of press it a little more on both sides than in the middle. But for the most part, I actually just set it with my drill press and crank down on the handle. It doesn't take much to make an indentation, but with it being this thick, I can actually press it enough that that shield, and I didn't sand this, it was just kind of a test piece, but that shield sits all the way into the wood, and then super glue over it and sand it, and even have that wood up to the level of the shield, which, it looks okay, but I still don't prefer it. I really like this look a lot better, and even if this was polished up, I did it both ways. It's actually hard to catch this, it's so shiny, but it just looks better when it's sticking out like that, so that's what I'm going with. Now the only other option, and Joe, you're probably gonna see some of this, but I do it 2 ways sometimes, and it really just depends on how it works out as I'm sanding the super glue. But I may be the only person that can tell. I showed these both to my kid, and he goes, oh, they look good. He couldn't tell what I was talking about. But these are not the same. And let me try and catch it on camera. These, one shield is under the coating, and one shield is level with the coating. Casey, what's going on? So, it feels nicer to be under the coating, but to have it be level with the coating, the reason I started doing this was so I could then sand and polish the shield all at once and get the shield really high polished, but I found polishing it before I even stick it down worked out way better. But sometimes this will happen if if I go to start sanding and it wasn't really thick over the thing, and if I start to see a little shiny corner, basically if I would sand too far through here, you'd see one little corner start to get exposed or whatever, and then you're into the shield. So sometimes if that happens, I'll just go all the way and sand until the shield itself is flush with the coating, and my lighting is not cooperating. So either way looks good. It's not coming out of there. It's embedded. It's stuck. So, just that's part of making them one at a time, is not sure how they're going to come out, and kind of is what it is. But yeah, so that I think covers most of it. But anybody who's still watching and doesn't think I'm insane at this point, you're wrong. Even so much as cutting out really nice scales and then drilling the backsides for the pockets, but drilling them the wrong way. And what I mean by that is Swiss Army knives are directional, and you can see that best on one that I was working on, because this is the match to that other one in the box of shame. So I'll show you some of my screw-ups here. This guy. Cut both of these. Swiss Army knife guy is probably going to see what I'm getting at here, but epic fail. And it's happened more than once, and every time I told myself I'll never do that again. That was stupid, but that ain't gonna work. I put that shield on after the fact. I knew this was a screw up, a test piece, whatever, so I just kind of playing with different stuff. But yeah, when you drill it and cut it the wrong direction, waste a nice, beautiful piece, that's kind of a bummer. But it was too thin to be able to flip it over and drill the other side. Anyway, so box of shame. But the other thing that's kind of frustrating on these guys, and you can kind of see it here, is Swiss Army knife liners are not exactly flat, and this is also a big pain in the ass. You get this nice rainbow here, which is a different level than over here. So they don't care when they put their plastic scales on there, but when I go to attach one of mine and that scale doesn't want to sit flat on there, it's really frustrating. So rather than try and sand this flat, I usually just take the Dremel and like carve a track out there so it can sit flat. But I really am trying to get it to sit dead flat all the way around the edge. That way it isn't like, sticking up or whatever. It'll just bite onto the rivets with the epoxy and lay on there flat. I just need to move it this way so it's lined up, but it's not like I gotta squeeze the ends and make sure it's in a vise and pressed and whatnot. I'm really trying to get them to sit on there flat and even and nice without needing any pressure anywhere, and then it's just a matter of holding them still until the epoxy dries. So that's where I'm at with that. But I think an hour and a half, that's as good of an explanation as I can get for Swiss Army knives. And for anybody who is not into Swiss Army knives, careful falling down the rabbit hole. That's all I got to say. They are a very, very deep rabbit hole. There's just so much to learn about them. There's so many different ones out there. It's very time consuming, actually, but I figured what the heck, it's been fun, and I have learned a lot. You don't want to know how many projects I'm in the middle of right now. That's not even a question I'm going to answer, but rest assured, everybody who has sent me something, your project is in progress. It's I think everything is already cut. So if I get something as a project, a lot of times I'll get it, dismantle it, whatever, cut it out, rough shape, choose the wood, whatever. But then from that point until it's finished, it really takes a run of particular inspiration, especially for one-off stuff. Swiss Army knives, I've gotten to the point where I can kind of crank them out. And not really production. They're still all one-of-a-kind, handmade. They're all going to be a little bit different. The wood is a little bit different. But, I kind of know what I'm doing with these at this point. To make the folding knife scales is a totally different animal. And I guess I can get into that because I've got one here that's in progress, but it's almost finished. So let me clear my space here a little bit. These ones are ready for epoxy, and then Joe, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more that'll be done after I'm finished this live stream, and I'm gonna get probably another 6 or 8 of them done in the next couple days, and they'll be sent your way. Might even get some 91s to list up on the site. So again, we got Joe with Lancelot Leather doing some leather slips for these, which are just fantastic. What a cool way to complement a nice looking piece of wood with some leather. So thank you, Joe. But one of the ones that I've been working on here, space cleared, is actually the first Ferrum Forge that I have had the chance to play with. This is the mini Archbishop, and unfortunately nothing spectacular to see. This one is in progress, but it has been coated all the way. It's been countersunk, everything. I hit it with super glue once, sanded it all the way down, and then it needed another layer. So it is dry now. This one is to the point of sanding and polishing, which I'm not going to do that on camera. This will be one that I finish up tonight with the final sand and polish. But this is going to be a cool knife. I'll post some pictures tomorrow, probably on my Instagram. I did have it together after I kind of sanded it down the first time. It looks really cool. This is a kind of a different directional cut on the koa. So what's going on is you see it one way, and then as soon as you turn it to the side, it's like almost like camouflage koa. You can't tell what you're looking at until you turn it this direction. It's just a really cool cut, and yeah, it's gonna look bitchin' all finished up. Even their little triangle shaped cutout, I got to work right. This is a very, very thin piece, and the hardware that they use on this mini is ridiculously small. So not happy about that. This has been a bit of a challenge to make it look right, but I think it's coming out cool. You can see just how thin the original scales are, and I couldn't really go much thicker. I mean, a lot of them I'll kind of leave a little thicker and contour and do what I need to do because, you know, the screws I can, but the hardware was literally microscopically tiny. So, I mean, there's only like 5 threads total. But yeah, this one will be finished up tonight, and I'll post some pictures on Instagram, and that one's all sanded up and put back together. But very cool. Appreciate getting to check out the first Ferrum Forge, and this one thankfully had the right colored backspacer. This nice olive green goes really well with the koa, so I didn't even attempt to make a backspacer. I like the way it looks. I like that, you know, kind of jimped look, especially when the edge of the koa that you're looking at, when you turn it that direction, you get the, you know, the chatoyancy that direction. So it's gonna look really cool all put back together. So excited to get this one finished up and continue on some of the other ones on my project list. So got some cool stuff coming up. I appreciate you guys hanging out and watching, and also, while I got you here, a couple of other things I wanted to share with you real quick. Some of these ones that go out will go out with a sticker. I finally kind of broke down and had a few of these printed up, so I will try and get some of these out to some people. I need to get another batch. I really just got a small run of them made to see how they looked and how I liked them, but came out kind of cool, so those will go in some. And then I want to say thank you to Jared Neve. On his Patreon giveaway, I actually won something. Crazy, because I very rarely even enter any giveaways. I'm just not, I don't know, I just don't do it very often. But this one seemed pretty compelling. There's, you know, not a ton of people on his Patreon, so I was like, hey, okay, I'll throw my name in the hat. I won. I got this very cool kind of Day of the Dead Hank by Issuing Stitches. And then this came in the mail. Very, very cool. And I am happy to show this off here real quick. this is just a very nice knife, and you'll forgive me because I don't remember what the name is on this guy. Custom Knife Factory, and maybe it has it on the card. This is, oh, I'm sorry, the MPAT. So these guys really do it right with their whole presentation, and yeah, I mean, really nice card, number 85, a couple of stickers, a Velcro patch, their own little cleaning cloth, and then what I thought was just over the top generous, a spare clip, which is cool, and a complete spare set of hardware. I mean, not just a couple of screws, but everything. Pivot, screws, little insert, everything. It's all in here. So how cool is that? I mean, the knife itself is absolutely my style, so I was super stoked on this guy. Yeah, definitely a sweet knife. He asked if I was considering Koa on this guy, which, oh man, that would be a serious challenge now that I've got it in my hands and looking at it, because their carbon fiber that they put on here is so super thin. They really, I mean, it's at this back edge, it's even thinner than that Ferrum Forge scales. So it's a very cool knife, just like it is. I mean, it's beautiful as it is. I'm not gonna mess with this one. I'm really happy with it, just the way it is. So figured I'd show it off to you guys. Thank you, Jared. Anybody who's in here, the 11 of you in here probably already know of Neve's live stream, but if you're not on his Patreon account, it's worth it. So, but that is very exciting. Thank you. Yeah, I was stoked. I mean, out of the other ones that he was giving away on the same video, I mean, the other two really didn't do anything for me, but this is absolutely right up my alley as far as style, and very cool knife. So thank you. That's what I've got for you guys. I think I'm gonna wrap this up here, only because it's getting to that time. I gotta start working on dinner for the kids, and get on with my evening here and start finishing some of the rest of these guys up for you. So thank you, very much appreciate you watching, and hope you learned something, even if that something was what not to do. I'm happy to help, but if you got any questions, drop them in the comments. As always, thank you guys, thank you for sticking around, and aloha. Catch you guys in the next video.